My father fired me after believing my sister's lies. "You're no longer my daughter," he yelled. 6 months later, I handed him the evidence that destroyed everything. Now my sister is the one begging for help. I used to scroll through stories online, reading about heartbreaking family betrayals and ugly workplace drama. And honestly, I always thought, with a sort of quiet relief, thank God my life isn't like that. My family was tight, my career was soaring, and my relationship with my dad was something I cherished above almost everything else in this world. Then, just 6 months ago, my entire universe imploded. It all crumbled in the span of a single, brutal afternoon. I'm 31 now, and until that day, I was the vice president of operations at Donovan and Associates. It's a mid-sized consulting firm, but it was so much more than that to us. My father, Frederick Donovan, built that company from absolutely nothing over 3 decades. He started in his garage with just one client and grew it into this incredible business, employing over 200 people across 3 states. Growing up, I saw him pour every ounce of himself into it. Weekends, holidays, late nights. He sacrificed so much to build something lasting. My mother, Beatrice, was right there beside him through every single struggle, every setback, every triumph. She believed in his vision when no one else did. Together, they didn't just create a business, they built a legacy. I have one sibling, my older sister, Francesca. She's 34, married to a guy named Damian Holloway, and they have a sweet 7-year-old son, Adrian. From the outside, Francesca's life looked absolutely perfect. A beautiful home in the suburbs, a successful husband, an adorable child. But I knew a truth nobody else seemed to see. Francesca had always resented me. The rivalry, it started when we were kids. I was the academic one, you know? The daughter who brought home straight A's, earned scholarships, and made our parents glow with pride at every graduation. Francesca was different. She struggled in school, dropped out of college after 2 semesters, and bounced between jobs for most of her 20s. Our parents loved us both equally, I truly believe that, but Francesca interpreted every success of mine as a personal failure of hers. When I joined the family business 8 years ago, fresh out of my MBA program, Francesca made her displeasure crystal clear. She had actually tried working at Donovan and Associates herself years before I arrived, but it hadn't lasted. She called it a toxic environment, and quit after 6 months. The truth, according to everyone who worked there at the time, was that she'd been caught padding her expense reports, and my father had quietly let her resign rather than face formal consequences. Francesca never forgave him for that, and she certainly never forgave me for succeeding where she had, in her mind, failed. What I didn't know then was that Francesca had maintained relationships with a few people at the company. Administrative staff, mostly, people who didn't know the full story of her departure. She'd occasionally stop by to say hello, bring cookies for the reception desk, chat with the security guards. Everyone just thought she was being friendly. Looking back now, with the chilling clarity of hindsight, I realize she was cultivating access, keeping herself familiar enough that no one would question her presence when the time finally came. For 8 long years, I dedicated myself to that company. I started in the lowest entry-level position, despite my education, insisting that I wanted to learn the business from the ground up. My father agreed. I spent my first 2 years doing everything from answering phones to shadowing project managers, even sitting in on client meetings where I wasn't allowed to speak. I wanted to earn my place, not just inherit it. By year 5, I'd worked my way up to Director of Client Services. By year 7, I was VP of Operations, overseeing the day-to-day functioning of all 3 offices. My father and I developed this incredible rhythm. He handled the big-picture strategy and major client relationships, while I managed the internal operations that kept everything running smoothly. Those were good years. Hard but good. The real trouble started last fall, around September, when Francesca suddenly reappeared in my father's life with renewed intensity. She'd been somewhat distant for years, showing up at holidays and the occasional birthday, but otherwise keeping her distance. Then, almost overnight, she was calling our parents every single day, stopping by the house multiple times a week, bringing Adrian over for impromptu visits. I thought it was sweet at first. I genuinely did. Maybe Francesca was finally maturing, finally ready to let go of old grudges and rebuild our family bonds. Our mother was thrilled. She'd always grieved the distance between her daughters. She started talking about family vacations and holiday traditions like we were children again. I should have been more suspicious. The change was too sudden, too complete. But I wanted to believe in redemption. I wanted to believe that my sister had finally grown up. What I didn't know was that Francesca was drowning. Damien's business had failed spectacularly. Something involving a lawsuit from a former partner and massive debt that he'd hidden from everyone, including my sister. They were on the verge of losing their house. Their savings were gone. And Francesca, rather than coming to the family honestly and asking for help, had devised a very different, and truly evil, plan. She was going to take my place. Not literally, of course. She knew she couldn't just step into a VP role without qualifications. But if I was disgraced and removed, she could position herself as the loyal daughter who'd uncovered the betrayal. She could ingratiate herself with our father, become indispensable as a consultant, helping during the transition, and eventually leverage that position into something more permanent. Meanwhile, she and Damien would use the stolen information to generate enough cash to dig themselves out of their financial hole. The first sign of trouble came in early November. I was in a meeting with our CFO, going over quarterly projections, when my assistant interrupted. My father needed to see me immediately. Her tone had been strange, she said. Cold. I found him in his office, the door closed, sitting behind his desk with his hands folded in front of him. The expression on his face was one I'd never seen directed at me before. Disappointment mixed with something harder. Something that looked almost like disgust. Sit down, he said, and the words carried no warmth at all. I sat, my heart already racing. Dad, what's wrong? He slid a folder across the desk toward me. Inside were printouts of emails. Emails that appeared to be from my company account. Emails I had never written. They showed correspondence with a competitor, discussing confidential client information, pricing strategies, internal projections. The final email in the stack was a request for payment, asking the competitor to wire $50,000 to an offshore account in exchange for continued information. Explain this, my father said. I couldn't speak. My mouth opened, but no words came out. The emails were clearly fake. They had to be. But they looked completely authentic. My email signature, my writing style, even references to real meetings and real clients that only someone with inside knowledge would know. Dad, I didn't write these. I finally managed. Someone fabricated them. I would never. Francesca brought these to me this morning, he interrupted, his voice cutting through mine. She found them on your work computer when she stopped by the office to surprise you with lunch. My blood ran cold. Francesca had been at the office? On my computer? She was heartbroken, my father continued, his voice thick with emotion. She kept saying she must be wrong. That there had to be an explanation. But there it is, isn't there? Right in front of us. Dad, please listen to me. I have never communicated with any competitor about confidential information. Those emails are forged. Someone planted them on my computer or fabricated them entirely. He shook his head slowly, and I watched something die in his eyes. His trust in me, built over 31 years, crumbling in real time. Your sister has no reason to lie. She's been nothing but supportive of you, even when you succeeded in ways she never could. She came to me in tears, hoping I would tell her she was wrong. And you believed her, I whispered, the words barely audible. Just like that? Without even asking me first. The evidence speaks for itself. I stood up then, my chair scraping harshly against the floor. No, it doesn't. Evidence can be manufactured. Emails can be spoofed. Someone is setting me up, and the fact that Francesca just happened to find this evidence on my computer should tell you exactly who that someone is. My father rose as well, and his face transformed into something I barely recognized. How dare you, he thundered. How dare you accuse your sister of such a thing? She has done nothing but try to repair this family. And now you're going to turn this around on her to save yourself. I'm telling you the truth. You're telling me lies. He was shouting now, his voice echoing off the walls of the corner office he'd occupied for 25 years. I built this company from nothing. I gave you every opportunity, every advantage. And this is how you repay me? By selling our secrets to competitors. I didn't do this, Dad. Please, you have to believe me. His next words landed like physical blows. You're fired. Clear out your desk and leave the building. And as far as I'm concerned, you're no longer my daughter. The world tilted. I grabbed the edge of his desk to steady myself, unable to process what I was hearing. My father. The man who had taught me to ride a bike, who had walked me down the aisle at my college graduation, who had told me every single day that he was proud of me, was looking at me like I was a stranger. Like I was something disgusting he'd found on the bottom of his shoe. Dad, get out. I left. What else could I do? Security escorted me to my office, watched me pack a single box of personal belongings, and walked me to the parking garage like I was a common criminal. I drove home in a daze, barely able to see the road through my tears. The next few weeks were a blur of pain. My mother called once, crying, saying she didn't know what to think, but that she needed time. My calls to my father went straight to voicemail. Francesca, meanwhile, apparently stepped right into my role at the company. Not officially, but she was suddenly helping out, while they searched for my replacement. And somehow, that temporary arrangement just kept extending. I wanted to collapse. I wanted to curl up in bed and never emerge. Every morning, I woke up and had to remind myself that I hadn't actually done anything wrong, because the crushing weight of my father's accusation made me feel guilty, even though I knew I was innocent. The loneliness was suffocating. Friends I'd had for years suddenly became unavailable. Industry contacts stopped returning my calls. Word spreads fast in consulting circles, and the narrative my father had allowed to circulate, that I'd been terminated for ethical violations, followed me like a shadow. People who'd attended my birthday parties, who toasted my promotions, who told me I was destined for great things, now crossed the street to avoid making eye contact. I couldn't even defend myself properly because the details of my termination were supposedly confidential, which meant the rumors grew wilder with each retelling. My apartment became both sanctuary and prison. I stopped cooking proper meals, surviving instead on takeout containers and cups of coffee that grew cold while I stared at the walls. Sleep came in fragments, interrupted by dreams where my father's voice echoed endlessly. You're no longer my daughter. You're no longer my daughter. One night, about 3 weeks after my termination, I found myself standing on my balcony at 2 a.m., watching the city lights blur through tears I couldn't seem to stop. The thought crossed my mind, just for a moment, that it would be easier to simply disappear. To let everyone believe the lie. To accept defeat. To fade away into nothing. That thought terrified me more than anything Francesca had done. The next morning, I called a therapist. Dr. Elizabeth Winters had been recommended by a former colleague, and she had availability that same week. Walking into her office felt like admitting defeat, but it turned out to be the first step toward reclaiming my life. You're experiencing acute trauma, she told me during our second session. Your identity was built around your family and your career, and both were stripped away simultaneously by people you trusted completely. The grief you're feeling is real and valid. It feels like I'm mourning someone who died, I admitted, my voice raw. Except they're all still alive. They just chose to stop loving me. Dr. Winters helped me understand that healing and fighting could happen simultaneously. I didn't have to wait until I felt whole again to start seeking justice. In fact, the pursuit of truth might be part of what made me whole. Because I'm not a person who gives up easily. My father taught me that much, at least. I started digging. I hired a forensic IT consultant named Oscar Tanner, a former FBI cybercrime specialist who now worked in the private sector. His firm specialized in digital forensics for civil litigation, and he had established relationships with law enforcement that would prove invaluable. I explained the situation, showed him the printed emails, and asked if there was any way to prove they'd been fabricated. Oscar was cautious at first. It depends on how sophisticated the forgery is, he said. If someone really knows what they're doing, it can be almost impossible to detect. I'll pay whatever it costs. Take as long as you need. Working with Oscar gave me something I desperately needed: structure. We met every Tuesday morning at a coffee shop near his office, reviewing findings, strategizing next steps, building our case piece by piece. He treated me like a colleague rather than a victim, and that professional respect helped me remember who I'd been before everything fell apart. Your sister made mistakes, Oscar observed during one of our early meetings. Criminals usually do. The smart ones know to cover their tracks completely, but most people underestimate how much digital evidence they leave behind. They think deleting a file means it's gone forever, or that using someone else's computer makes them invisible. And it's not. He smiled grimly. Almost nothing is ever truly gone. Data has a way of persisting in places people don't expect. Server logs, backup systems, metadata embedded in files. Visitor logs, badge records, ISP routing data. If your sister did this, she left fingerprints. We just have to find them. The investigation consumed my days. When I wasn't meeting with Oscar or reviewing documents, I was reconstructing my own timeline. Every meeting, every email, every phone call from the months before my termination. I created spreadsheets tracking Francesca's movements, cross-referencing her visits to the office with unusual activity on my computer. The work was tedious and often heartbreaking, but it kept me focused on something other than my pain. My mother called occasionally during those months. The conversations were awkward, filled with long silences and careful non-statements. She wanted to maintain a relationship with me without taking sides, which meant she couldn't acknowledge my innocence or Francesca's guilt. I understood her position intellectually. She was trying to preserve both her daughters, but emotionally, her neutrality felt like another betrayal. Your father misses you, she said during one call about 2 months into my exile. He doesn't say it, but I can tell. He sits in his study and stares at the photos from your graduation. If he misses me, he knows where to find me. He's stubborn. You know that. He's convinced himself that he made the right decision. And admitting otherwise would mean admitting he destroyed his own daughter's life based on lies. Yeah, I replied, the bitterness sharp in my throat. I imagine that would be uncomfortable for him. She sighed. I'm not excusing what he did. I'm just trying to explain. I don't need explanations, Mom. I need someone in my family to believe me. She couldn't give me that, and we both knew it. We ended the call with promises to talk soon that neither of us fully believed. Over the next 6 months, Oscar became my secret weapon. He obtained copies of the email server logs through legal channels. My attorney, a sharp woman named Veronica Sanchez, helped with that by filing a preservation request and threatening litigation, which compelled the company to retain and produce the records. Oscar also submitted formal requests to the building management company for visitor logs and electronic access records, which they were required to maintain for insurance and liability purposes. Meanwhile, I needed income. I'd saved money during my years at Donovan and Associates, but I wasn't going to sit idle and watch my savings drain away, especially with Oscar's fees adding up. I reached out to a former colleague named Naomi, who had left the company years ago to start her own consulting firm. She'd heard rumors about my departure, everyone in the industry had. But she knew me well enough to ask for my side of the story. The whole thing smells wrong, she said after I explained. You're the most ethical person I've ever worked with. You literally reported yourself once for accidentally taking a company pen home. I laughed despite myself. I remember that. You thought I was insane. I still do, she deadpanned. But that's exactly why I know you didn't do what they're saying you did. Naomi offered me a consulting position, off the books at first, helping her with operations strategy. It wasn't VP-level work, but it was something, a purpose, a reason to get out of bed in the morning. As the months passed, Oscar began uncovering threads of truth. The emails had been sent from my computer, yes, but the timing was strange. They were all sent during a 2-week period when I'd been traveling for work in Montana. And the login records showed access from an IP address that didn't match any of my known devices or locations. The email server logs included originating IP addresses for each message, and none of them traced back to the hotels or client sites where I'd actually been. More importantly, Oscar discovered that someone had installed remote access software on my work computer. The installation date corresponded exactly with the day that Francesca had visited the office, ostensibly to bring me lunch, though I hadn't been there to receive it. How would she have gotten onto my computer? I asked when Oscar explained this. It's password protected. He pulled up another document. According to the access logs, someone entered your password correctly on the first attempt. No failed tries. That means either she knew your password already or someone gave it to her. I felt sick. My password was a combination of my mother's birthday and my childhood pet's name. Information Francesca would have known easily. I'd never thought to use something more secure, because I trusted my family. She knew it, I said quietly. She would have been able to guess it. Someone gave themselves backdoor access to your machine, Oscar explained. They could log in remotely, send emails as you, access your files, anything they wanted. Can you prove it was Francesca? He hesitated. The remote access came from an IP address registered to a residential internet service provider. I can see what neighborhood the service address is in based on the ISP's regional routing data, and it's consistent with your sister's area. But to get the exact street address, I'd need a court order to compel the ISP to release subscriber information. It wasn't ironclad proof, but it was enough to keep going. During month 4, I hit a wall. The investigation had stalled. We had circumstantial evidence pointing to Francesca, but nothing that would hold up in court or convince my father beyond doubt. Oscar was working other cases and couldn't dedicate unlimited time to mine. My savings were dwindling despite the consulting income from Naomi. The weight of uncertainty was crushing me. I called Dr. Winters in a panic one evening, convinced I was about to lose everything again. What if I never prove it? I asked, my voice shaking. What if she gets away with this forever? What if I spend the rest of my life knowing the truth, but being unable to make anyone else see it? Dr. Winters was quiet for a moment. Let me ask you something. If you never prove it, if the evidence never materializes, will you know in your heart what the truth is? Of course. I know I didn't do this. Then that knowledge belongs to you regardless of what anyone else believes. Your integrity isn't determined by external validation. You know who you are. But my father. Your father made a choice, a terrible one, based on incomplete information and emotional manipulation. That choice reflects on him, not on you. You're not responsible for his inability to see the truth. The conversation didn't solve anything practically, but it shifted something inside me. I'd been so focused on vindication, on proving myself to others, that I'd forgotten I didn't actually need their approval to be whole. I knew my truth. That foundation couldn't be taken from me. 2 weeks later, Oscar called with news that changed everything. The breakthrough came in month 5. Oscar managed to trace the offshore account referenced in the fabricated emails, the one where my supposed $50,000 payment was to be sent. Whoever created the forgery had made a critical mistake. They'd used a real account number, one that had actually received wire transfers from an anonymous source. That anonymous source? A shell company traced back to Damian Holloway, Francesca's husband. Oscar explained how he found it. The offshore account was registered in a jurisdiction that requires nominee directors, but they got sloppy. The formation documents listed an email address for correspondence, and that email domain was registered to Pinerist Holdings LLC, a Delaware shell company. Delaware requires listing an incorporator on formation documents, and Damian Holloway signed as incorporator. He probably didn't realize those records are publicly searchable. They hadn't just framed me. They'd actually committed the crime they'd accused me of, using my identity to do it. The $50,000 wasn't a fantasy. It had actually been paid for information that had actually been stolen. The competitor in question had genuinely received confidential Donovan and Associates data, and they'd paid for it, believing they were paying me. The real criminals had been Francesca and Damian all along. When Oscar delivered his final report, I sat in his office for nearly an hour, unable to speak. The evidence was overwhelming, not just suggestive, but definitive. Every piece connected to every other piece, forming a chain of culpability that led directly to my sister's door. How did they think they'd get away with this? I finally asked, my voice hoarse. Oscar leaned back in his chair. They probably assumed the investigation would stop once you were fired. Most companies don't dig deeper after they find a scapegoat. It's easier to cut your losses and move on than to admit you might have made a mistake. Your father was never supposed to question the evidence. And Francesca knew that. She knew exactly how he'd react. She counted on it. The whole scheme depended on my father's willingness to believe the worst about me based on her word alone. If he'd taken even basic steps to verify, had the IT department checked the email headers, for instance, the forgery would have been obvious within hours. The cruelty of it hit me fresh. Francesca hadn't just framed me. She'd weaponized our father's love against me. She'd exploited his guilt about their fractured relationship, his desire to believe she'd changed, his tendency to make quick decisions based on emotion rather than evidence. She'd studied him the way a predator studies prey. What happens now? I asked. Oscar slid the folder across the desk. Now you decide what to do with it. You can take this to law enforcement and let them handle prosecution. You can file civil suits against your sister and her husband. You can present it to your father and let him deal with the fallout internally. He paused. Or you can do all three. I took this information to Veronica, my attorney. She reviewed everything Oscar had compiled and sat back in her chair with a low whistle. This is solid. We can go to the police, or we can go directly to your father. What do you want to do? I'd thought about this moment for months. Fantasized about it, really. The vindication, the look on my father's face when he realized he'd been wrong. I'd imagined him begging for my forgiveness, my sister being dragged away in handcuffs, the entire company witnessing my triumphant return. But fantasy and reality are different things. I want to confront them together, I said. My father needs to hear the truth from me, and Francesca needs to be there when he does. Veronica nodded slowly. It's risky. If your sister knows you have evidence, she might try to run or destroy documents. She won't run, I stated, feeling a surge of certainty. She's too arrogant for that. She thinks she got away with it. I was right. When I called my mother and asked her to arrange a family dinner, my first contact with the family in 6 months, she was overjoyed. Oh, sweetheart, your father will be so happy. He's been miserable, even if he won't admit it. I'm sure he has, I said, my voice carefully neutral. Can you make sure Francesca and Damien are there too? I have some things I need to say to the whole family. My mother agreed without question. She'd always been the peacemaker, the one who believed that any wound could be healed with enough love and time. The week before the dinner was the longest of my life. I rehearsed what I would say, imagining every possible response, every potential objection. I created backup copies of all the evidence and stored them in 3 separate locations: my apartment, a safety deposit box, and Veronica's office. Paranoia had become second nature. Naomi took me shopping for what she called my vindication outfit, a charcoal gray blazer, and matching slacks that made me look professional and composed. You want to walk in there looking like the CEO you should have been this whole time, she said. Let them see exactly what they threw away. I barely slept the night before. My mind kept cycling through possibilities. What if Francesca denied everything? What if my father still chose to believe her? What if the dinner descended into chaos before I could present my evidence? What if I broke down crying and couldn't finish what I'd come to say? At 4 p.m. on Saturday, I stood outside my parents' house for the first time in half a year. The garden looked the same as always, my mother's roses climbing the trellis, the stone path my father had laid himself 20 years ago. This had been my home once. These people had been my foundation. I took 3 deep breaths and rang the doorbell. The dinner was scheduled for a Saturday evening, 6 months almost to the day after I'd been fired. I arrived at my parents' house with a folder under my arm, the same way my father had delivered my death sentence. Tonight, I would deliver his awakening. Oscar's full report, Veronica's summary, bank records, IP logs, installation records for the remote access software. Everything documented and undeniable. Francesca was already there when I walked in, her arm linked with Damien's, her smile wide and welcoming. Little sister. It's so good to see you. We've missed you so much. The audacity nearly took my breath away. She really believed she'd won. My father stood in the living room with a drink in his hand, watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. My mother rushed forward to embrace me, tears already streaming down her cheeks, and I let her hold me for a long moment before gently extracting myself. Can we sit down? I said. There's something I need to share with all of you. We gathered in the living room, my parents on one couch, Francesca and Damien on the other, me standing in the center like a defendant in a courtroom. Or more accurately, like a prosecutor about to deliver closing arguments. 6 months ago, I began, my voice steady, though my heart pounded against my ribs. I was fired from the company I dedicated 8 years of my life to. I was accused of corporate espionage, of selling confidential information to competitors, of betraying everything our family has built. My father's jaw tightened, but he didn't speak. I was also disowned. My own father looked me in the eye and told me I was no longer his daughter. My voice cracked slightly on those words, but I pushed forward. I've spent every day since then trying to understand how he could believe such a thing about me. How he could throw away 31 years of love and trust based on emails that anyone could have forged. The evidence was clear, my father said stiffly, his eyes fixed on me. The evidence was fabricated. I opened the folder and began laying documents on the coffee table. This is a forensic analysis of the email server logs. It proves that those emails were sent from my computer using remote access software. Software that was installed on my machine on October 15th of last year, a day when I was in Montana at a client site. I glanced at Francesca. Her smile had frozen in place. Do you know who was in the office that day? Who stopped by to bring me lunch, even though I wasn't there? I laid down another document. This is a visitor log from building security. Every guest has to sign in at the front desk and badge through the turnstiles. Francesca signed in at 2:47 p.m. and signed out at 3:23 p.m. The building management company retains these logs for 1 year for liability purposes. And here's the electronic badge record from the turnstile system, showing her visitor pass accessing the 4th floor where my office is located. Plenty of time to install the software that gave her remote access to my computer. This is ridiculous, Francesca blurted, but her voice had gone thin, sharp with panic. You're making things up to blame me for your mistakes. Am I? I laid down the bank records next. This is a wire transfer record showing $50,000 paid to an offshore account. The account is owned by a shell company called Pinehurst Holdings LLC. Pinehurst Holdings is registered to a man named Damian Holloway. Your husband. Damian's face went white. My mother had her hand pressed to her mouth, a silent scream. My father was staring at the documents like they might bite him. Francesca and Damian committed corporate espionage against our family's company, I said, my voice steady now, cold as ice. They stole confidential information, sold it to a competitor, and framed me for their crime. They destroyed my career, my relationship with my family, and my reputation in an industry I'd worked my entire adult life to build credibility in. That's a lie, Francesca shouted, jumping to her feet, her composure finally shattering. She fabricated all of this. She's always been jealous of me, always trying to make me look bad. Sit down, Francesca. Our father's voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried the weight of a command. Sit down and stop talking. She sat. He picked up the documents one by one, examining them with the same analytical eye he brought to every business decision over 30 years. I watched him read, watched his face cycle through disbelief, comprehension, and finally, utter devastation. The IP addresses match, he said, almost to himself. The timing. The shell company. He looked up at Damian. Is this true? Did you sell my client data to Silverline Technology? Damian's silence was answer enough. Francesca started crying then. Not tears of remorse, but tears of pure frustration, of a meticulously crafted plan falling apart. You don't understand. We were going to lose everything. The house, the cars, Adrian's school. Damian's business failed, and we had nothing left. So, you stole from your own family? My mother's voice was barely recognizable, harsh with betrayal. You framed your sister, destroyed her life, and stole from your father? I was supposed to inherit that company. Francesca screamed, tears now fully streaming down her face. I was the firstborn. But she came along with her perfect grades and her perfect MBA. And suddenly everything was about her. I deserved that position. You deserve nothing, I said, my voice quiet, but firm. You quit. You walked away. And when I earned my place through 8 years of hard work, you decided to take it from me by force. The effort. Francesca laughed bitterly, a harsh, ugly sound. I watched you for 8 years, playing the humble worker bee while Dad smiled and nodded and planned to make you his successor. Nothing I did was ever going to be good enough. So yes, I decided to take what should have been mine all along. By committing federal crimes, by framing your own sister, by doing what I had to do to survive. The silence that followed was absolute. Francesca's confession hung in the air, undeniable and damning. Whatever sympathy her desperation might have earned evaporated in the face of her complete lack of remorse. My father straightened his spine and looked at his eldest daughter with an expression I'd never seen before. Not anger, not disappointment, but something that looked almost like pity. I'm calling the authorities tonight. Whatever happens next is out of my hands. Dad, please. Francesca started. Don't. His voice was firm now, decisive in a way it hadn't been since I walked through the door. You've said enough. More than enough. The aftermath unfolded over the following weeks. Damien confessed to everything once he realized the extent of the evidence against him. The corporate espionage, the wire fraud, the identity theft. His cooperation with federal investigators earned him a reduced sentence, but he still faced substantial prison time. Francesca, who had been the mastermind of the scheme, was charged as a co-conspirator. Her lawyer tried to paint her as a desperate mother protecting her child, but the premeditation of the scheme, installing remote access software months before the emails were sent, undermined any claim of desperation. She was facing serious charges, and her expensive suburban life was about to become a memory. Adrian, my 7-year-old nephew, was the true innocent victim in all of this. My mother stepped in to help care for him while his parents dealt with legal proceedings. I found myself feeling more sympathy for him than I'd expected. He hadn't asked for any of this, and whatever happened to his parents, he would carry the consequences forever. My father formally reinstated me at Donovan and Associates, with a public announcement explaining that I had been wrongfully accused and fully exonerated. He offered me a promotion, CEO, effective immediately, with him stepping back to chairman emeritus. I accepted, but not without conditions. You believed her over me, I said, sitting across from him in the same office where he'd destroyed my world. Without investigation, without due diligence, without even giving me a chance to defend myself. You chose her word over 31 years of me proving who I am. His eyes were red-rimmed. He'd aged a decade in the week since the dinner. I know. I have no excuse. I let my guilt about Francesca cloud my judgment. I'd always felt I'd failed her somehow, that I'd driven her away from the company. And when she came back into our lives, I was so desperate to make amends at my expense. Yes, I confirmed, my voice unwavering. At my expense. And I will regret that until the day I die. We sat in silence for a long moment. Outside the window, the city continued its daily rhythm, indifferent to the wreckage of our family playing out in this corner office. I need you to understand something, I finally said. I'm not accepting this position because I forgive you. I'm accepting it because this company matters to me. Because I poured 8 years of my life into it, and I refuse to let Francesca's betrayal steal that from me, too. But our relationship, that's going to take time. Maybe years. Maybe forever. My father nodded slowly. I understand. Whatever you need, however long it takes, I'll be here. Will you? I challenged, my gaze locking with his. Because 6 months ago, you weren't. 6 months ago, you threw me away like garbage based on forged emails and your guilty conscience about the daughter who actually deserved your suspicion. He flinched at that. Good. He needed to understand that his apology, however sincere, didn't erase what he'd done. I'm going to implement new protocols, I continued. Independent oversight for any accusations involving family members. Mandatory forensic review of digital evidence before any termination decisions. And I'm bringing an outside counsel to review all HR procedures. This company will never destroy another innocent person the way it destroyed me. Whatever you think is best. I know it's best, I stated. That's why I'm telling you, not asking. The apology was sincere. I believe that. But trust, once shattered, doesn't rebuild overnight. My relationship with my father would never be what it was before. That innocence was gone forever. A month after I resumed my position, Francesca reached out. Not to me directly, she was under strict legal advisement not to contact me, but through our mother, who relayed her messages with visible discomfort. She says she's sorry, my mom would whisper, her voice trembling. She wants you to know that she never meant for things to go this far. She thought when she was established in the company, she could make everything right. Make everything right. I scoffed, but there was no humor in it. She stole proprietary information, committed federal crimes, and destroyed my life. How exactly was she planning to make that right? My mother had no answer. The begging started shortly after. As her legal bills mounted and her assets were frozen pending trial, Francesca became desperate. She couldn't afford adequate representation. She was going to lose her house. Adrian needed stability, she said. And how could I let my nephew suffer for her mistakes? I listened to these appeals through my mother, each one more pathetic than the last. Finally, I gave my response. Tell her that I hope she finds peace with what she's done. Tell her that I don't wish her ill, because holding on to hatred would only poison my own life. But also tell her this. She had every opportunity to come to us honestly when she was struggling. She could have asked for help. She could have admitted that Damien was in trouble and that they needed support. Instead, she chose to destroy me. That was her decision, made with full awareness of the consequences it would have for my life. I paused, choosing my next words carefully. So no. I will not help her. I will not pay her legal bills. I will not save her house. I will, however, ensure that Adrian has everything he needs: education, healthcare, a stable home with our parents if necessary. But Francesca made her bed when she decided to sacrifice me for her own benefit. Now she can lie in it. My mother cried when she delivered that message. She'd always wanted her daughters to be close, to support each other through life's challenges. Learning that such closeness had been impossible all along, that Francesca's resentment ran so deep she'd commit crimes to satisfy it, had broken something in her that might never heal. As for me, I've returned to work. I've rebuilt relationships with colleagues who believed in my innocence, even when my own father didn't. I've created new protocols for security and oversight that will prevent anything like this from happening again. And every morning when I wake up, I remind myself that the truth prevailed. It took 6 months, tens of thousands of dollars in forensic investigation, and more emotional pain than I knew I could survive. But justice was served. My sister is awaiting trial. My father is learning that forgiveness must be earned, not demanded. My mother is grieving 2 daughters, one lost to prison, one lost to betrayal. And me? I'm the CEO of a company that nearly destroyed me, running an operation that my father built and my sister tried to steal. Every day I walk through those offices, I'm reminded of how close I came to losing everything. But I didn't lose. That's what matters. Francesca thought she could erase me, replace me, become me. She thought our father's love was a prize to be won through manipulation rather than earned through merit. She learned otherwise. I survived. I fought back. And when the dust settled, the truth spoke louder than any lie my sister could construct. To anyone out there who's been betrayed by family, who's been accused of something they didn't do, who's watching their world collapse around them, don't give up. Document everything. Hire professionals. Trust the process. The truth has a way of surfacing, even when those who should have believed you didn't. Even when your own father tells you you're no longer his daughter. Even then, hold on. Keep fighting. And when your moment comes, when you finally have the evidence to prove your innocence, make sure everyone who doubted you is there to witness it. That's not revenge. That's justice. And sometimes, justice is the sweetest victory of all.